Donald Trump continues to threaten the very same people who's prosecuting him. And a new poll comes out saying the vast majority of Trump supporters say that the real issue in America is racism against white people, not racism against black people. I kid you not. Let's go to it. Late on Sunday night, this seems to be a theme for Trump. He launched yet another attack on the Department of Justice for conducting multiple investigations into him. And then ranted, quote, have they looked at the recent poll numbers? After receiving a target letter from the DOJ early last week that alerted him to an investigation tied to the January 6th terrorist attack. The former president has ramped up his attacks on special counsel Jack Smith and Sunday night's TruthSocial post. I'm going to give you more of that, but before I get into the, well, let's just say meat of it, it is interesting to note that right after Donald Trump received the letter saying, hey, you're a target of another criminal investigation by the federal government, he decides to announce it to the world, eliminating the, pressure from the DOJ having to be on the defensive about it. He comes out, he spins a narrative. He basically has already admitted to doing it. And, here we are. He then releases literally a video. He decides to put a video on TruthSocial saying that very bad things are going to happen if you continue to do this. Once again, we consider that to be a veiled threat. Let's put it up. Donald Trump said, and I quote, how many times can crooked Joe Biden's Department of Injustice, together with their local Democrat DAs and AGs, indict his political opponent during the course of the campaign? Do they understand the damage being done to America? It will only get worse. We must stop these monsters from further destroying our country. Okay? Now, this comes from the same guy who literally ran a campaign on the phrase, lock her up. Then he gets elected president of the United States. He decides to do a three-way call, asking, pressuring, blackmailing a foreign head of state to investigate the son of his political opponent. There's more. Trump also said, do you think that A.G. Garland and deranged Jack Smith understand that we are in the middle of a major political campaign for president of the United States? Have they looked at recent poll numbers? Why don't they bring these ridiculous charges? Why didn't they bring these ridiculous charges years before? Why did they wait to bring them now? A virtually unheard of scenario. Prosecutorial misconduct, election interference. In related news, a new poll has come out that says Trump voters and Republicans are more likely to say racism against whites is a problem than they are to say anti-black racism is a problem. Although President Joe Biden defeated Trump in an electoral landslide that has been reaffirmed over and over by state officials from Trump's own party, Trump won a majority of white voters. And a new Yahoo News YouGov poll illustrates the contours of Trump's support. The survey of 1,638 US adults, which was conducted from July 13th to 17th, shows that among 2020 Trump voters, 62% said racism against Black Americans is a problem today, okay? While 73% say that racism against white Americans is a problem. Ask how much of a problem racism currently is. 19% of Trump supporters describe racism against Black Americans as a big problem. Twice as many, 37%, say racism against white Americans is a big problem. Trump voters and self-identified Republicans overlapping, but they are not identical cohorts, are the only demographic groups identified by Yahoo News and YouGov who are more likely to say racism against white Americans is a problem than to say the same about racism against black Americans. A majority, 51% of white Americans, for instance, think racism against people who look like them is a problem. But overall, far more white Americans, 72%, say racism against black Americans is still a big problem. The poll also showed that 82% of black respondents say racism against black people is a problem, while only 27% believe racism against whites is a problem. To talk about this and a lot more, we have Dr. Metzl, who literally wrote a book about it. Doc, the hell is going on?
Well, I think there are two parts that are important of the million important parts of this. First is about the Trump and the indictment part. We did a pretty big study here at Vanderbilt across Tennessee and Kentucky and some other southern states, and we asked about values. And it seemed kind of a surprise to us, but there were these overarching values that people in the South felt that were similar to kind of the rest of the country. And one was fairness. Fairness, we want the system to be fair. Like people told us again and again, the system doesn't feel fair to me. And so, and then, other stuff, family values, hard work leading to things like that. So I think this Trump thing, it really creates an opening. I think they should be asking, is it fair if Trump broke the law that he escaped the consequences? I really think they should be hammering the theme of fairness and asking people and saying in these interviews, in advertisements, if Trump broke the law, is it fair that he escapes punishment or should he be judged like everybody else? Something like that. And I'm just saying that because I've seen media missing this point a lot. I mean, we're pretty good at asking like other GOP candidates that. I think Pence was asked this question on MSNBC the other day. But I think fairness is the way to go in terms of messaging this, because if that's not the case, then we're going to see what Trump did just now, which is he turns it into a witch hunt and I'm the victim and I'm suffering from you and stuff like that. But I do think still there are some openings here, depending on how this is handled, to say like, hey, look, if Trump broke the law, should he be punished just like you or somebody like that? The racism part, it, of course, as you're saying, is an extension of what I found in my book, Dying of Whiteness, The Politics of Racial Resentment, which is people feel like they're a victim of a system that benefits them and in a way erases their own complicity in a system that's oppressing other people. But I have no problem saying there shouldn't be racism against anybody. And so if anti-white racism is a problem, we should eradicate that also. Why don't we have a national attempt to kind of do away with racism? So I have no problem with saying, let's do away with anti-white racism, tell us what it is, and then we can work on it together. I mean, I think empathy is a reasonable strategy here, as opposed to trying to compete for like your mine's worse than yours or something like that. Now, of course, Trump has again cornered the market on I'm standing up for you or something like that. But again, I think this is an opening for Democrats to say, hey, look, if you feel like you're the victim of racism, tell us about it and we can address it.
I had a caller call my radio show this morning, and this was a white conservative talking about racism against white Americans. For the first time, Trump supporters are actually admitting that racism is a thing. Before, the narrative was, we do not have a racist country. Racism as an ism does not really exist. You will always have some level of unfairness or bigotry, but it does not exist in the context of an ism. And then all of a sudden, when proclaiming that whites are being discriminated against, it is racism again. There is an ism connected to that. Before I go to the next segment, dear brother, you are a psychiatrist. Please explain to us, how can an individual who seemingly has some level of ability to contrast, to compare, to analyze information, how can they not see the hypocrisy in that statement alone?
Well, again, I think it's an opening for a strategy. Like, I think if we say we're against racism, tell us your pain, and hey, guess what? We have methods for dealing with racism, like critical race theory and other stuff like that. But I think there are methods. So if that's the field we're playing on, it's actually not a terrible field for the Democrats. If we're admitting there is racism, hey, we got methods for that. But I will say what I found in my research was that there was a lot of kind of deep guilt, probably similar to what we see with Trump, but people kind of felt like they were in some ways. Now, again, I think that the slippery slope here is that there are a lot of white people who are screwed over by the system. I mean, I've seen them a lot in where I live and in Tennessee where I was doing my research. But they were being trained to say we're the victims of people who are also the same people we're oppressing. Because if that wasn't the case, they would have to say, man, I'm going to have to look up, because really white people are being screwed over by white corporations and white politicians and the white system that drains all the money from the system that could be giving them roads and schools and healthcare and other factors like that. And so in a way, there's this training of basically saying we're the victims of people who are less fortunate than us, which serves a particular purpose, because if people are looking down, they don't look up, right? And so in a way, it's so embedded in the South, which is like, it's got to be these guys who come and they want to take what's mine, as opposed to seeing the people who really are screwing you over, which are the people who are enacting tax cuts for money that should be going to your healthcare and factors like that.
Very well said. I've noticed that a lot of individuals will personalize challenges in their lives and say, well, this is a personal failure. Well, they want you to believe it's a personal failure. It's actually a policy failure. But they would prefer you to believe that either it's based on you or it's based on somebody else, like another person in your community, rather than what it actually is, and that is an adverse policy. So the rat race continues.